HOA forged my name while I was in a hospital bed and sold 1,700 acres of my land. They held a secret vote, erased my legacy, and handed it to a developer tied to the HOA president. But they had no idea. I own the co-op that feeds their entire community. Now their bank accounts are frozen, the FBI is involved, and I planted lavender where her pool used to be. You don't inherit land like this, you inherit responsibility. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. My name's David Collier. I wasn't born with much, but I was born with 1,700 acres of soul, rolling hills, quiet creeks, and soil my father swore was worth more than gold because it grew life. Not wealth, not condos, not coffee shops. Life. That land has been in my family since 1896. It has outlived wars, droughts, and real estate booms. But nothing came closer to killing it than the day the town decided to rezone for growth. I still remember the fight my father took on in the late 90s, when a foreign company tried to swallow up our valley for a tech park. They offered him a fortune. He offered them the gate. They came back with threats. Eminent domain, pressure from city council. Legal noise meant to scare us off our own soil. He didn't bend. He died that year. Massive heart attack. The stress, the meetings, the weight of holding back a system bigger than any one man. But he kept the land in our name. He died with the deed in his hand. I was 21 when I buried him beneath a cottonwood he planted with his own father. From that day on, I swore I'd never let anyone touch this land again. And for a while, no one did. The town changed. People moved in. Then came the suburbs. Sidewalks crept closer. One by one, pastures turned into gated communities. Most of the old farmers sold and moved out. I didn't blame them. Property taxes went up. Schools were built where cattle used to roam. By the time I was 40, I was surrounded. My farm bordered on all sides by neatly trimmed lawns, wrought iron gates, and people who thought eggs came from Whole Foods. Then came the HOA. I first met Evelyn Brewster at a community fundraiser for wildfire recovery. Late 40s, perfect posture, pearl earrings, a voice like she trained in charm school. She introduced herself as the president of the Meadowglade Ridge Homeowners Association, as if I should already know who she was. She smiled like someone who'd been handed power and didn't know how to carry it quietly. "Mr. Collier, we're also impressed with your farm. It's quaint. Quaint. That's what they call it when they're about to bulldoze it." Over the next year, Evelyn popped up everywhere, asking about sustainability, noise ordinances, irrigation boundaries, all under the guise of coexisting with the community. At first, I played nice. I thought maybe she was just one of those overly involved types with too much time on her hands. But then, I noticed little things. Surveyor flags near my western fence, white chalk lines that weren't mine, a drone flying low, hovering over my irrigation pumps. One morning, I found a clipboard nailed to a cedar post near my barley field, an HOA land use compliance assessment. No return address, no explanation. I laughed it off, shrugged, tossed the clipboard in the back of my truck and figured they were just bored retirees looking for a fight they wouldn't win. But looking back now, that was the first shot. I just didn't recognize the war yet. The thing about folks like Evelyn, they never come at you straight. They wear respect like a mask, smile while they scheme, and always act like they're the victim when you finally push back. And me? I let my guard down. For the first time in my life, I believed that having the deed meant having the power. I forgot that power doesn't come from paper. It comes from knowing how to use it. The next time I saw Evelyn, she was standing in my driveway with a clipboard in one hand and 3 men in suits behind her. She smiled. You may want to check your mail, Mr. Collier. There have been some changes. That's when I felt it, the shift, the silence in the soil. The kind of quiet that means something sacred is about to be stolen. It started with a bend in the road and ended with black ice. I was on my way to deliver a crate of squash to a local food pantry, one of those side roads behind the ridge where the county still hasn't bothered to put in real guardrails. The frost came early that morning. I remember the sun had just broken over the tree line when the truck went sideways. There was no time to pray, no time to steer. Just a violent twist, a tree trunk, and everything going black. When I woke up, there was a nurse leaning over me and pins in my leg. 3 cracked ribs. Concussion. Fractured ankle. They kept me under sedation longer than I realized. I lost 3 weeks in a haze of painkillers and slow, groggy recovery. In that time, they moved fast. When I got home, hobbling up my porch on crutches, the first thing I noticed was the smell of diesel. Not mine, not from my trucks. Something newer, louder. Then I heard it, metal driving into soil, machinery, heavy equipment groaning in my east field like it had every right to be there. I dropped the crutches, limped past the gate. And there they were, survey stakes, neon orange ribbons fluttering in the wind, marching like soldiers across my barley rows. A man in a vest glanced up and said, "You the property liaison?" I just stared. The next thing I saw was Evelyn Brewster's white Lexus pulling into my gravel drive like she owned the dust beneath her tires. She stepped out, heels too clean for this place, smiled too wide for what she was about to say. "Mr. Collier," she chirped. "Welcome home. You've been missed." I asked her what the hell was going on. She didn't blink. "There was a vote," she said matter of fact. The HOA held an emergency meeting to address long-standing land use inconsistencies. Your property was deemed non-compliant with the revised community plan. I blinked back at her, half sure I was still on painkillers. She continued, flipping through her clipboard like it was a sermon. "Due to your extended absence and lack of active compliance certification, the land was considered dormant and fell under annexation rights defined in Section 13B of the updated Community Zoning Charter. Annexation. They were saying my land, my family's land, was now theirs. Absorbed like a slow cancer swallowing a healthy cell. You never even told me there was a vote," I said, my voice dry. She smiled wider. "The notice was posted on the HOA digital board. You didn't log in." I stared at her, chest tight. "I'm not part of the HOA." Her eyes didn't waver. "Technically, you are now." That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by unopened mail, thick envelopes stamped in red, legal notices, certified warnings, zoning modifications. Some dated while I was still unconscious. They moved like predators sensing blood in the water. While I was hooked up to IVs, they were rewriting maps. While I was learning to walk again, they were fencing off the land that fed this town for 4 generations. They called my property abandoned. They said it hadn't been actively cultivated. But that season's rotation was always cover crop, planted on purpose to replenish the soil. They knew that. Evelyn knew that. She used to boast at HOA brunches about how local and organic their catered produce was. Half of it came from my damn fields. I made calls. Every county office bounced me like a rubber check. "It's already in the system," they said. "You'll need to file an appeal." One clerk even apologized, said it was one of the fastest push-throughs he'd seen. Almost like someone greased the right wheels. By week's end, the development firm had already posted renderings online. They weren't just claiming my land, they were erasing it. The name of my farm wasn't even on the public record anymore. All that was left was a digital mock-up of something called The Grove at Meadowglade, luxury homes from the mid-1800s. I couldn't sleep that night. I went out to the edge of the north field, sat on a stump, and watched the stars come out like they always did, except nothing felt like it used to. The land was still there, but I wasn't sure I was. It hit me then, not just that I was losing the farm, but how they'd done it. Not with a bulldozer, not with a gun, with a vote I never saw coming. They'd found the one moment I was too weak to fight, too hurt to stand, too quiet to matter. And they used it to steal everything. But they forgot something. I wasn't buried. I was just planted, and I was about to grow into their worst nightmare. I've always believed in paper trails. The land teaches you that. You mark what you plant. You track what you harvest. You document the rainfall, the pests, the soil shifts. Keep a record of what the world takes and what you give back. Turns out, the same principle applies to people who steal. The morning after I saw the development plans online, I drove, still limping, to the county clerk's office. Small building, beige siding, smelled like old paper and coffee that had burned on the pot too long. The woman behind the desk looked up with tired eyes. I gave her the parcel number. She typed slow, with long nails that clicked on the keyboard. Then she frowned, tilted her head. "Looks like the property's already been recorded as transferred," she said. My heart kicked hard. Transferred when? About 2 weeks ago, sold to Blue Rise Developments, LLC. The name felt like acid in my throat. "That's impossible," I said. "I never sold anything." She turned her screen toward me, and there it was, a deed of sale, time-stamped, sealed, and signed. With my name, it looked official, crisp, black ink. But it wasn't my signature, not even close. I stared at it, the way you stare at a stranger wearing your clothes. "Can I get a certified copy of this?" I asked. She nodded, printed it, and stapled it neatly. I took it in silence. Back in my truck, I laid it out across the steering wheel. Page 1, land description, legal terms, valuation. Page 2, signatures, buyer, seller, notary public, Walter H. Green. That name rattled something in my memory. I'd seen it before. At home, I pulled an old binder from my father's records, flipped through dusty paperwork from the 90s, back when we'd refinanced to keep the farm out of foreclosure. Sure enough, same notary. Walter Green, different signature, but it matched his ID number. Here's the thing. Walter Green died in 2019. I confirmed it with a quick online obituary search. Died peacefully at home, beloved grandfather, buried in the same cemetery as my father. So, how did a dead man notarize a land deal last month? My stomach turned. This wasn't just a clerical error, this was fraud, straight up. Cold and deliberate. I started pulling threads, took the buyer's name, Blue Rise Developments, and looked up the LLC registration. It was filed out of Tallahassee. No direct contact info, just a law office and a holding company. But after some digging, I found something buried in the incorporation documents, a name listed under initial investors. James Hartwell. It rang a bell. Took me a while, but I placed it. Evelyn Brewster's brother-in-law. A commercial developer with a habit of flipping distressed farmland into golf communities. I leaned back in my chair, let the ceiling fan spin slow above me. So that's what this was. Not just theft, collusion. A sweetheart deal between the HOA and a blood relative buyer. Sell land they didn't own. Forge the paperwork. Move fast while I was too broken to stand. The deeper I looked, the dirtier it got. I pulled the full chain of title transfers. The original deed showed my name as the seller. A day later, it was assigned to Blue Rise. A week later, the county approved the development application. And just a few days after that, $4.5 million was deposited into an escrow account tied to a shell company out of Nevada. Not a dime of it touched my accounts. And the worst part, the HOA board signed off on it. unanimously. I tracked down their meeting minutes. Buried in the legalese was a line about strategic property alignment and emergency zoning modification to support neighborhood expansion. They had packaged the entire land grab as a public benefit initiative to ease housing congestion. The betrayal wasn't just procedural, it was personal. These were people who ate at my table, smiled at my face, sent me fruit baskets every harvest season. They knew what this land meant. Evelyn herself once told a local paper how beautifully nostalgic it was to live next to a working farm. Now she was cashing checks off its corpse. I stared at the forged deed for a long time that night. My name sat there like a bruise, faintly wrong, but official enough to pass. The fake notary stamp, the made-up timeline, the silence from every office that should have flagged it. They thought they'd buried me in bureaucracy. They thought I was too slow, too old-fashioned to notice. They thought the land would be the only thing they stole. But I wasn't broken. I was angry. And anger, when it's patient, becomes strategy. I scanned everything, backed it all up, made 3 separate binders, one for legal, one for records, one for the fireproof safe. Then I started listing names. Evelyn James Hartwell, the 3 HOA board members who signed the resolution, every clerk who processed the paperwork without raising a flag. They might have rewritten history on paper, but I was about to rewrite the ending. They wanted war. They forgot I was raised on land that teaches you to endure, and I had just found their first crack. There's a kind of justice that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with warning shots or courtroom gavel cracks. It moves slow, silent, like frost creeping across a windshield. You don't see it until it's already there. That's how I planned it. See, years ago, when the farm was doing better than folks expected, I didn't buy a new truck, didn't build a second house. What I did was invest in something quieter. There's a regional organic food distributor based out of Eastgate, Harvest Ridge Co-op. Most folks know it as a name on the side of a food truck, or stamped on those burlap-wrapped produce baskets you get at bougie farmers markets. What they don't know is, 4 years ago, when the founder's son got into debt, I bought controlling interest through a shell LLC. I didn't need the publicity, I just wanted control. Because if you control the food, you control the tables people sit at. You control the conversation, even if they don't know you're speaking. And Harvest Ridge? It feeds nearly every HOA clubhouse in 3 counties, especially Meadowglade Ridge. Evelyn herself once did a ribbon cutting for a new HOA nutrition program, bragged on live TV that their homes proudly serve only local, organic produce from ethical sources. I was that source. She just didn't know it. Until I started closing the taps. At first, it was small, subtle, a few missed deliveries, a routing error here, a warehouse delay there. The Meadowglade Clubhouse ran out of spinach for their garden party brunch. The HOA meeting buffet came without the usual kale and quinoa salad Evelyn loved to gloat about. Then came the cancellations. Exclusive supplier agreements, revoked. Suddenly, Meadowglade Ridge was removed from our preferred delivery zones. Their gourmet chef, calling 3 times a day begging for order reinstatements, but no one was returning his calls. And Evelyn, still clueless. I watched it unfold like a slow-motion demolition. HOA emails grew frantic. The events team started outsourcing to lower-tier wholesalers. People noticed. One resident posted a photo of the new food on Facebook with the caption, "Since when is Meadowglade serving cafeteria mystery meat?" The HOA board got nervous. Catered events became liabilities. The food wasn't arriving. When it did, it wasn't what they ordered, it wasn't local, it wasn't organic, it wasn't us. And the whispers started. I had a friend still on the vendor committee, She called me laughing one night. Said the HOA board was blaming Evelyn for mismanaging supplier relations. That Evelyn had promised exclusivity. That she claimed logistical improvements were being implemented. That everything was under control. It wasn't. Because Evelyn didn't know the pipeline led back to me. Every box, every crate, every refrigerated delivery truck on Meadowglade's loading dock came from a company I quietly ran from a warehouse outside Ridge Creek. And now, those trucks were parked, redirected, reassigned to schools, co-ops, food banks, places that appreciated where it came from. Not thieves in heels. To be clear, I didn't starve them. I'm not cruel. I just cut the luxury. They still got food, just not the food they used to brag about. Not the artisanal goat cheese platters or the infused microgreens, or the signature squash chutney that Evelyn liked to serve with her infamous estate luncheons. Those luncheons stopped. The HOA newsletter stopped featuring menu spreads. Residents started showing up to meetings, started asking questions. Why was the clubhouse food budget doubled, but the quality dropped? Why were long-standing vendor contracts suddenly disappearing? Evelyn danced around answers. But even her poise has limits. You could see it. Cracks in her voice at meetings, flustered interviews, passive-aggressive jabs at local businesses failing to meet their obligations. That part made me laugh. Because she was right, we weren't meeting their obligations anymore. We were answering to mine. I never raised my voice, never sent a warning, never filed a complaint, because power doesn't shout. It waits, watches, and when the time is right, it takes back everything that was stolen. One forkful at a time. I knew Evelyn wouldn't sit quietly. People like her don't crumble. They claw. It was only a matter of time before the silent pressure I was putting on the HOA would push her into retaliation. I expected something petty. Maybe a cease and desist, a gossip campaign, HOA newsletter slander. I didn't expect the state to come knocking. It started with a phone call from a man named Daniel Reeves, Environmental Compliance Officer from the State Department of Agriculture and Environmental Resources. Calm voice, professional tone. But his words were loaded. "We received an anonymous complaint," he said. "Claims of illegal pesticide use, chemical dumping, and runoff contamination from your eastern plots." I didn't answer right away, because part of me wasn't surprised. "She really filed that?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He sighed. "We have to investigate. I'm sending 2 field agents tomorrow morning, just routine. You have the right to request legal representation." "I won't need it," I told him, because I already had everything I needed. Over the years, I'd kept meticulous records, soil reports, water table readings, application logs for every organic treatment I'd ever used. I installed drone surveillance last season to monitor crop health. That drone footage now served a second purpose: time-stamped aerial proof that no such dumping ever occurred. Still, when the state agents arrived, I treated them with respect. Not because I had to, but because the truth doesn't need a defense attorney when it's got documentation. They spent 4 hours on site. I walked them through every inch of the land Evelyn had accused me of poisoning. The eastern plots, cover crops, 0 treatments. The southern field, cleared for rotation, hadn't seen spray in 6 months. They asked about runoff. I handed them a file with 5 years of runoff retention basin data, signed off by a hydrologist. Agent Reeves watched me the entire time, not with suspicion but curiosity, like he couldn't figure out why someone would come at me with such a manufactured claim. By the end of the inspection, he shook my hand. "This is cleaner than most university research farms," he said. But Evelyn wasn't done. 3 days later, a local blog published drone footage, dark liquid, pouring from what looked like a tank into a shallow ditch. The caption, "Toxic Practices on Collier Land." It made the rounds. Facebook shares, HOA email chains. Evelyn never officially attached her name, but her fingerprints were all over it. I watched the footage 10 times. It wasn't my land, but someone had worked hard to make it look like it was. Same slope gradient, same cedar posts, but the timestamp didn't match my drone logs. The lighting didn't align with that day's actual cloud cover. More than that, the fencing in the footage had a welded corner bracket style I hadn't used in 20 years. It was a fake, and fakes leave trails. I called a friend, Bryce, a digital forensics guy I'd known from back when the co-op was setting up e-commerce systems. I sent him the video. Within 2 hours, he called me back. "It's composite," he said. "Footage was layered. And get this, the drone ID metadata was stripped, but the source file still had a watermark from a security firm called Falcon Point Risk Solutions. I'd never heard of them, so I started digging. Falcon Point was registered to an address in Austin, Texas. The managing partner? A man named Lauren Griggs, former private contractor, and, according to HOA financial disclosures posted 6 months ago, on retainer as security advisor for none other than Meadowglade Ridge HOA, which brought me right back to Evelyn, or more specifically to her treasurer, Paul Menning, CPA, quiet, efficient, and apparently responsible for approving that shady contract. It was all fitting together. Evelyn had hired a private firm to fabricate drone surveillance, then leaked it to local media to stir outrage. She didn't want to beat me in court. She wanted to destroy my reputation before I ever got to the courthouse steps. That's when I shifted gears. I called my attorney. Her name's Nora Santiago, former state prosecutor turned agri-rights litigator. When I handed her the drone analysis, the faked signature deed, and the trail connecting Falcon Point to Evelyn's treasurer, she leaned back in her chair and smiled like a rattlesnake. "This just went federal," she said. We filed suit the next morning. Defamation, fraudulent misrepresentation, property theft, and malicious interference with business operations. But that was just the start. Nora also submitted a formal complaint to the State Attorney General's office, requesting an investigation into HOA corruption and illegal surveillance activity. Evelyn had just escalated to a war she wasn't equipped to fight. She thought I'd stay on defense, but that was her last mistake, because now it was my turn to go legal. And I wasn't coming with clipboards or HOA bylaws. I was coming with federal filings, forensic experts, and a paper trail signed in blood and arrogance. She wanted to bring the state into it? Fine. She just didn't realize I'd bring the feds. Some victories don't come with fireworks. They come in the form of a 6-digit code, missing from a line no one thought to check. I was reviewing the forged deed again, this time with Nora Santiago, my attorney, when she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Wait, where's the USDA classification code?" I looked at her, confused. "The what?" Every agricultural parcel enrolled in the Federal Conservation or Crop Subsidy System is assigned a USDA FSA code. Without it, no sale can legally clear federal land databases, especially not for land under agri-protection status. I felt the weight shift. She was right. My father had enrolled half our acreage into a federal conservation program back in '93. The remaining plots had been part of rotational subsidy programs ever since. That meant any land transfer required USDA authorization and a copy filed with the National Agriculture Compliance Registry. That file didn't exist, because the sale never cleared USDA systems. In federal records, the land had never left my name, meaning the deed Evelyn's board used to transfer it? Fraudulent. The sale to Blue Rise Developments? Legally null and void. It wasn't just wrong. It was reversible. And now I had proof. Nora didn't waste a minute. She filed an immediate cease and desist through the Federal Agricultural Land Use Division. We sent copies to the development firm, the HOA legal counsel, and the state zoning board. The effect was instant. Blue Rise panicked. Their legal department sent a request to pause project operations pending title clarification. Their construction crews pulled back. Machinery stopped showing up. The HOA board? Split down the middle. Half of them had no idea Evelyn had bypassed USDA compliance. The other half, her loyalists, tried to downplay it as administrative error. But this was no typo. Evelyn doubled down. She called it sabotage by a disgruntled neighbor and tried to pressure the board into silence. But cracks were showing. One board member, a retired judge, refused to sign off on any more development funds. The tide had shifted, and I was ready to tip it over. We filed a full lawsuit in district court, fraudulent land transfer impersonation, with intent to deceive property theft under federal Agri-Code protections. We didn't stop there. Nora submitted a parallel complaint to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Office of Inspector General, flagging not just the forged documents, but also Evelyn's failure to disclose federally registered acreage before authorizing sale. The final move? A federal injunction, binding, enforceable, and signed by a district judge. And I made sure it was delivered the right way. The HOA's next board meeting was held in their signature faux marble clubhouse. Chardonnay on tap, catered fruit trays, the usual. Evelyn stood at the podium, ready to spin another tale of progress. That's when the county sheriff walked in. Badge visible, documents in hand. The room went silent. He handed Evelyn a manila envelope and said, clear enough for the back row to hear, "You're ordered to cease all development activity on parcel 17A through 17G pending federal investigation. Property remains under the legal ownership of David Collier." You could have heard a pin drop between the gasps and the dropped wine glasses. Evelyn's hands shook. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Because in that moment every lie she built came crashing down under the weight of one unfiled code. And I was just getting started. Some battles are fought in courtrooms, others are won on camera. It started small, just a piece in the Sunday edition of the County Ledger. Headline: Farmer accuses HOA of land fraud amidst federal injunction. 2-column spread, polite language, but it had all the bones: forged deed, USDA violation, cease and desist order. I didn't say much in the article. Just a quiet interview on the back porch, coffee in hand, boots muddy from a morning walk through my barley rows. I told the reporter the truth, flat, simple, undeniable. I never sold the land, I said, and I never signed that deed. That was all it took. By Tuesday, Channel 8 picked it up. Local segment. Evening news. Then came the radio chatter, Facebook groups, even the town subreddit. Everywhere, people were asking the same question. Did Meadowglade Ridge HOA really steal 1,700 acres of farmland? Then came the bombshell. An independent reporter, young guy named Mason Rudd from a digital outlet, got curious. He filed a public records request for campaign finance disclosures. Found a string of donations from Blue Rise Developments and Falcon Point Security to various HOA board election campaigns over the last 2 years. It wasn't illegal, but it sure as hell looked dirty. Mason ran the story with a headline that didn't pull punches. HOA, president linked to developer donations, private surveillance firm in land dispute scandal. That's when the national news sniffed blood. But the real moment, the one that shifted everything, came during a live charity event Evelyn hosted at the Meadowglade Clubhouse. Something about fundraising for community beautification. She was in front of the cameras, mic in hand, wearing one of those immaculate cream blazers she favored. Midway through her speech, a Channel 8 anchor approached her with a mic and a smile, followed by a cameraman already rolling. "Mrs. Brewster," he said, "can you explain why your HOA approved a forged deed of sale tied to your brother-in-law's development company?" Her face changed in real time, from pageant poise to panic. She tried to laugh it off, asked if they'd like to schedule a proper interview. The reporter pressed, asked about the notary who'd been dead for 4 years, the private drone surveillance, the federal injunction, the campaign checks. That was the moment someone in the crowd shouted, "Answer the damn question, Evelyn." She turned pale. Someone else booed. The live feed cut soon after, but it was already viral. Within 48 hours, 3 HOA board members resigned. The treasurer, Paul Menning, lawyered up, and the FBI opened a preliminary inquiry into HOA zoning manipulation, citing evidence of systemic abuse of land designation statutes. Evelyn? She disappeared. No public statement, no apology. Her Lexus didn't leave the driveway for days. But my trucks? Oh, they rolled, back on their routes, back into HOA neighborhoods. Only this time, every box bore my name in bold green print. Collier Farms, honest food, local roots. I didn't need revenge, just the truth. And now, the town that once tried to pave over my family's history was swallowing headlines about the woman who thought she could outmaneuver the soil. But the land remembers. And now, so did everyone else. If there was one line they couldn't afford to cross, they found it with a bulldozer. It was a Tuesday, cloudless, too quiet. I was walking the north edge of the property, one of the few untouched zones Evelyn hadn't dared tamper with yet. That corner had always been off limits for a reason. Not because I said so, but because the U.S. government did. 12 acres, marshland restoration, protected under a joint conservation easement I co-signed with a wildlife nonprofit nearly a decade ago. We'd restored native grasses, brought back pollinators, and turned it into a nesting ground for 3 species of migratory birds. The easement was recorded, registered, and updated annually with the U.S. Department of the Interior. It was untouchable, which is why I froze when I saw the dust plume on the horizon. Machinery. 2 excavators. 1 backhoe. A crew in yellow vests. And fencing. Gone. They'd torn down the cedar post perimeter and driven straight into the soil like it was any other lot. They didn't even know what they were touching. The crew was from a subcontractor hired by Blue Rise Developments. Last-minute push to clear the northeast parcel for drainage, according to a permit request filed weeks prior. A permit Evelyn's board had quietly submitted without triggering the conservation flags in the county database. It should have been kicked back, denied. But somehow, it slipped through. When I got there, I didn't yell, I didn't curse, I just walked up, slow and steady, and said, "You realize what land you're on?" The foreman blinked. "This is Section 17G, right?" "No," I said. "This is federal conservation land under protective easement, and you just dug up a wetland buffer zone." They stopped immediately, packed out the equipment. But the damage had already been done. You don't scrape 10 inches of topsoil off federal wildlife ground and expect no one to notice. I called Nora. She didn't even wait for me to finish before saying, "That's it. That's the bullet." Within 48 hours, we filed a federal environmental violation complaint, not just with the state, but directly to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of the Interior. Included drone images, time-stamped footage, soil disturbance data, and the easement paperwork. The lawsuit that followed was no longer civil. It was criminal. Violation of the Endangered Species Conservation Act. Wetland destruction. Federal property damage. Evelyn and her board had crossed into territory that no HOA charter could shield them from. No developer could spin it as a mistake. This wasn't a zoning gray area anymore. It was a black and white federal offense, and I wasn't going to let them hide from it. I requested that Evelyn be personally served at her home. I wanted her to answer the door herself, and she did. I wasn't there, but the process server was kind enough to describe it afterward. Mid-morning, Evelyn in her garden gloves, a clipboard in one hand, just like always. She opened the door, expecting another HOA member or maybe a landscaper. Instead, she was handed a manila envelope. Department of the Interior seal on the cover. The server told me later she just stared at it, then looked up and asked, "Who reported this?" His answer? David Collier. He said her face went white. No denial, no defense. Just the weight of everything collapsing at once. By the following week, Blue Rise pulled out. They scrubbed their website clean of all Meadowglade references. The HOA bank accounts were frozen, pending forensic audits tied to development funds. Federal investigators began interviews. The conservation nonprofit filed a separate lawsuit for damage to the protected acreage. And Evelyn, gone. Resigned for personal reasons. Statement issued through a lawyer. No apology, no admittance, just silence. But she didn't need to speak. The land spoke for her. Every mangled inch of that wetland. Every stolen signature. Every backroom deal disguised as neighborhood progress. It all came back. Not as vengeance, but as consequence. And the best part? I never laid a hand on anyone, never shouted, never stormed through their meetings. All I did was let them dig their own grave, on the wrong side of the fence. 6 months later, I stood on a patio that used to belong to Evelyn Brewster. The house was quiet now. No more champagne brunches, no more committee meetings under pergolas wrapped in fairy lights. Just wind. And silence. It was the silence that struck me most. After the lawsuits, the resignations, and the federal investigations, the HOA collapsed under its own weight. A court order dissolved it. What was left of its finances went straight into restitution accounts for the lawsuits it triggered, including mine. Turns out fraud, surveillance, and destruction of federal conservation land comes with a heavy price tag. Evelyn couldn't afford it. Her house was seized by court order, liquidation to cover damages. They listed it quietly, thinking no one would notice. But I did, and I showed up to the auction with exactly $1. That's what I paid for her 3-bedroom estate with the stone pool, wraparound deck, and the view she used to brag about. People asked me if it was revenge. It wasn't. It was closure. I didn't move in. I didn't host a party. I didn't even touch the furniture. I let it sit for 3 days untouched, then called a crew. We demolished the pool first. I stood there the entire time, watched as they cracked the tiles, tore up the deck, shattered the glass fencing she installed after banning children from using it to preserve elegance. When it was done, just a pit of fresh soil, I brought in the seeds myself. Lavender, long rows of it, fragrant, resilient, quiet, the kind of plant that keeps growing year after year, even after being stepped on. That field blooms now every summer. I let anyone walk through it. No signs, no fences, just rows of calm purple that rise up from the ground like a hymn. People take photos there. Weddings have been held under the arch I built from old cedar posts salvaged from my father's barn. Funny how beauty blooms in the space arrogance used to fill. As for the rest, the farm's fully restored. All 1,700 acres. The conservation land was replanted under federal supervision. The co-ops thriving. We signed new contracts with regional schools, senior centers, and tribal food programs. Our name's on every box now. Collier Farms. No more shell companies, no more silence, just legacy. Out in the open. People ask if I miss the way things used to be. I don't. Because sometimes it takes losing everything to realize what you still carry. And what I carried, what my father carried, and his before him, was never just a piece of land. It was the belief that roots matter, that truth doesn't need noise to stand strong, and that justice, when planted deep enough, always finds its way back to the surface. Evelyn's name? You won't find it anywhere now. Not on signs, not in minutes, not even in whispers. But the lavender? That'll be there long after all of us, and it will bloom in silence. If you've ever been blindsided by bureaucracy, this story was written in your name. If you've watched quiet corruption tear through good soil, you already know what's at stake. Hey, we don't knock, we document, we dig, and we outlast. Stick around. The land has more secrets to tell, and not everyone walks away clean.